Please! Don't eat it! She pleaded. The cowboy froze after one bite. The cowboy spat the first bite into the fire. The old woman standing across from him screamed so loudly that the horses bolted into the dark. Please don't eat it! She begged again, tears pouring down her wrinkled face. But it was too late. The stranger cowboy wiped blood from the corner of his mouth as the campfire cracked between them. The stew tasted normal at first, warm, rich, almost comforting after 3 days of hunger in the mountains. Then he felt it. Something hard. Something tiny. And when he pulled it from his mouth, the entire camp fell silent. Because resting in his trembling palm was a child's gold wedding ring. Not burned. Not melted. Fresh. The cowboy slowly looked toward the 6 starving children sitting beside the wagon. And suddenly, nobody touched their food anymore. What he discovered that frozen winter night would force him to choose between survival and the last piece of his humanity. The storm arrived without warning. One moment the mountains of Wyoming stood calm beneath a pale orange sunset, and the next, black clouds rolled over the sky like a curse. Snow exploded across the valley in violent waves, swallowing the trail whole. Elias Boone pulled his coat tighter against the wind as his horse stumbled through knee-deep snow. He had been riding alone for nearly 2 weeks, carrying little more than a rifle, a bedroll, and the guilt he could never outrun. People once called him Sheriff Boone. Now they called him nothing. 3 years earlier, Elias had lost everything in a single night. A bank robbery gone wrong. One innocent boy caught in crossfire. The town blamed Elias for failing to stop it. Maybe they were right. Since then, he wandered from place to place, taking odd jobs, avoiding friendships, sleeping under cold skies because loneliness hurt less than memory. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt dangerous. The wind screamed harder through the canyon. His horse suddenly panicked, rearing backward. Easy, boy, Elias muttered. Then he saw them. A wagon. Half buried in snow. One broken wheel. And beside it stood a woman holding a lantern that flickered weakly against the storm. She looked old from exhaustion more than age. Her gray hair whipped wildly in the wind as 5 frightened children huddled behind her. Please! She shouted. Help us! Elias hesitated. Trouble followed desperate people. It always had. But then he noticed the smallest child, a little girl wrapped in torn blankets, shaking so violently her lips had turned blue. Something twisted painfully inside him. He dismounted. What happened? Our horses died yesterday, the woman answered. We've been trying to reach Red Hollow before the storm closes the pass. Elias looked toward the mountains. You won't make Red Hollow tonight. Fear crossed her face because she knew he was right. The storm was worsening fast. Name's Margaret, she said softly. These are my grandchildren. Elias counted silently. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But something felt strange immediately. The children barely spoke. They stared at him with hollow eyes, thin faces, and the kind of silence only hunger creates. How long since you've eaten? Elias asked. Margaret avoided his eyes. Yesterday morning? Elias cursed quietly under his breath. He searched his saddlebag and handed the children dried meat. The smallest boy grabbed it so fast he nearly bit Elias's fingers. The children devoured every scrap like starving wolves. Margaret didn't eat. She simply watched them with tears in her eyes. That night Elias helped drag the wagon beneath a rocky cliff for shelter. Together they built a fire while snow buried the world outside. The children fell asleep close together beneath blankets. For the first time in years, Elias sat beside other human beings instead of alone. He hated how much he missed it. Margaret stirred a pot above the fire. What's in it? Elias asked. Rabbit stew, she answered quietly. The smell filled the camp. Rich. Savory. Almost too good. Elias's stomach growled painfully. Margaret noticed. You should eat first, she whispered. But before he reached for the bowl, she suddenly grabbed his wrist. Her fingers trembled violently. Please, she begged. Don't eat it. Elias frowned. What? Her eyes darted toward the sleeping children, then toward the stew, and fear flooded her face. Please, she whispered again. Not until morning. The wind outside howled like dying animals. Elias slowly pulled his hand away. Woman, he said carefully, what exactly is in this stew? Margaret opened her mouth. But before she could answer, one of the children screamed in his sleep. The oldest boy sat upright, drenched in sweat. He's coming back, the boy cried. Grandma, he's coming back! Margaret rushed to comfort him. Elias watched silently. Something was wrong here. Very wrong. Hours later, long after everyone slept, Elias opened his eyes to whispers outside the wagon. He quietly reached for his revolver and stepped into the storm. Margaret stood alone near the cliff edge, crying softly into the darkness. He doesn't know, she whispered to herself. God forgive me, he doesn't know. Elias stepped closer. Know what? Margaret froze. The lantern light revealed terror across her face. Then slowly, she pointed toward the stew pot still hanging over the dying fire. And in that moment, Elias noticed something floating beneath the broth. Something small, round, golden. The next morning changed everything. Dawn arrived gray and merciless. The storm had not stopped. Snow buried the wagon wheels completely, trapping them deep in the mountains. Elias barely slept after discovering the gold ring inside the stew. All night terrible thoughts clawed through his mind. Whose ring was it? And why had Margaret begged him not to eat? As the children slowly woke, Elias noticed how weak they truly were. Their cheeks were hollow. Their hands shook constantly. This wasn't ordinary hunger anymore. This was desperation. Margaret sat silently beside the fire, staring into the ashes. Finally Elias approached her. You're going to tell me the truth. She closed her eyes. For a long moment only the storm answered. Then she spoke. There were 6 children. Elias felt ice crawl down his spine. Margaret pointed toward the smallest girl sleeping beneath blankets. Emily's twin brother, she whispered. Daniel. The little girl stirred softly at the sound of his name. Margaret continued carefully, as if every word cut her open. We got trapped in the mountains 8 days ago. Food ran out after 4. Elias said nothing. He already feared the answer. The cold took my son first, she whispered. The children's father. Her voice cracked apart. We buried him beneath the snow. Then Daniel became sick. The old woman began trembling uncontrollably. He cried for food all night. I held him until morning, but by sunrise. She couldn't continue. Elias suddenly understood why she never touched the stew. Why the children stared at food with fear. Why the gold ring had been inside the pot. No, Elias whispered. Margaret burst into tears. I tried to stop them, she cried. God help me, I tried. The children had survived by doing the unthinkable. Not from cruelty. Not from evil. But from terror. Hunger had turned innocent souls into survivors. Elias staggered backward, sick to his stomach. Every instinct told him to leave. To run. To abandon this nightmare in the snow. But then he looked at the children. They weren't monsters. They were starving. Broken. Traumatized. The oldest boy stepped forward with tears in his eyes. We didn't want to die, he whispered. Those words shattered something inside Elias Boone. Because suddenly he remembered the little boy from the bank robbery years ago, the child he failed to save. For years Elias believed redemption was impossible. But maybe redemption wasn't about changing the past. Maybe it was about refusing to abandon people in the present. Without another word, Elias grabbed his rifle. Margaret looked up. Where are you going? To hunt. There's nothing alive in this storm. There better be. For 9 brutal hours Elias searched the mountains. The blizzard sliced through his coat like knives. Twice he nearly froze to death crossing narrow ridges. But he kept moving. Because somewhere behind him sat 5 children who had already seen horrors no child should ever know. As sunset approached, Elias finally spotted movement beneath the trees. A deer. Thin. Weak. But alive. Elias raised his rifle with numb fingers. Then lowered it. The animal stared at him helplessly. He thought about the children again. One shot echoed through the valley. Hours later, Elias returned dragging the deer behind him. The children stared in disbelief. Margaret collapsed crying. That night, real food cooked above the fire for the first time in days. No one touched the old stew pot again. Before eating, Elias quietly carried it away from camp and buried it beneath the snow beside a lonely pine tree. No words were spoken. Some grief deserved silence. Days later, the storm finally passed. Elias guided the family safely to Red Hollow, where townsfolk rushed to help them. Doctors treated the children. Neighbors offered shelter. For the first time in weeks, warmth replaced fear. As Elias prepared to leave town quietly before sunrise, he heard footsteps behind him. The smallest girl, Emily, stood holding something in her tiny hands. Daniel's gold ring. "You forgot this," she whispered. Elias stared at the ring for a long moment, then slowly closed her fingers around it. "No," he said gently. "You keep it." Tears filled the little girl's eyes. "Why?" Elias looked toward the rising sun beyond the mountains. "Because love survives even the darkest winters." Emily hugged him tightly before running back toward town. Elias Boone stood alone in the cold morning light, watching the sky slowly brighten above the snow-covered world. For the first time in years, he no longer felt lost. And somewhere deep beneath those frozen mountains, buried under snow and silence, rested the terrible secret of one desperate family who learned that survival may save the body, but mercy is what saves the soul. If today's story touched your heart, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And remember, even a small act of kindness can change someone's entire life. Red Heart.